The shovel blade struck the hard Texas soil with a dull thud that echoed through the quiet morning, and Rose Fairfield's arms trembled with exhaustion as she tried once more to break through the unforgiving earth. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, falling in sweat-dampened strands around her face, and the black morning dress she wore was covered in dust from the journey to this lonely spot just east of her small homestead outside Wyatt, Texas. She had been at this for 2 hours already, the spring sun of 1878 climbing higher in the sky, and the hole for the oak sapling was barely 8 inches deep. Rose wiped her brow with the back of her hand and looked at the young tree resting in its burlap wrapping beside her. Thomas would have wanted this. Her husband had talked about planting trees around their property, about watching them grow tall and strong, about sitting in their shade when they were old and gray together. That future had died with him 6 weeks ago when the fever took him, leaving her alone at 23 with nothing but a struggling homestead and memories that hurt more than any physical labor ever could. She drove the shovel down again, her hands already blistered beneath her worn gloves. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up, shading her eyes against the sun. A rider was coming down the road that ran past her property, and as he drew closer, she could make out a tall figure on a chestnut horse, leading a pack mule behind him. Rose straightened up, suddenly aware of how she must look, alone out here digging in the dirt. She was not afraid exactly, but a woman alone had to be cautious. She kept the shovel in her hands, ready to use it as a weapon if needed, though her arms were so tired she doubted she could swing it with much force. The rider slowed as he approached, then stopped his horse a respectful distance away. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and light brown hair that curled slightly at his collar beneath a worn hat. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy, the kind who spent long days in the saddle, and he had an easy way of sitting his horse that spoke of years in that occupation. But it was his eyes that struck her most, a clear gray blue that looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Morning, madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was low and pleasant, with a gentle drawl that suggested he was from somewhere further south. "I do not mean to intrude, but are you all right? You look like you might need some help." Rose felt her cheeks flush. "I am managing, thank you." The cowboy looked from her to the barely started hole, then to the tree waiting to be planted. He did not say anything, but she could see him taking in the situation, the black dress, the fresh grave marker she had erected 50 yards away under the cottonwood tree where Thomas rested. "My name is Samuel Vance," he said, dismounting with a fluid grace. "I have been working a cattle drive-up from San Antonio, and the boss cut some of us loose in town since we brought the herd in early. I was just passing through on my way to Fort Worth to see about another job." He paused, then added gently, "That soil is tough as iron this time of year, madam. Probably going to take a pickaxe to break through properly. A shovel alone will not do it." Rose felt tears prick her eyes at the simple truth of his words. She had been struggling for hours, and he had diagnosed the problem in seconds. "I do not have a pickaxe," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a softening that transformed his face from that of a stranger to someone who genuinely cared about her predicament. "I have one on my mule," he said. "If you would permit me, madam, I would be honored to help you plant that tree." She should have said no. She should have maintained her pride and independence, should have sent him on his way with thanks but no acceptance. But Rose was so tired, so worn down by grief and exhaustion and the sheer difficulty of managing alone, that the words that came out of her mouth were, "I would be grateful, Mr. Vance." He gave her a small smile that reached his eyes and made something in her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Please, just Samuel is fine." He retrieved the pickaxe from his pack, along with a canteen of water that he offered to her first. Rose drank gratefully, not realizing how thirsty she had become. Then Samuel rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms tanned dark and corded with muscle, and went to work on the hole. The pickaxe bit into the hard soil with authority, and Rose watched as Samuel worked with the practiced efficiency of a man accustomed to hard labor. He broke up the compacted earth, then used her shovel to clear it out, then went back with the pickaxe. The hole deepened steadily, and within 20 minutes it was already twice as deep as what she had managed in 2 hours. "You planning to plant this in memory of someone?" Samuel asked as he worked, his tone conversational but respectful. Rose wrapped her arms around herself despite the growing heat of the day. "My husband, Thomas. He died 6 weeks ago from fever. He always wanted to plant trees around our property." Her voice broke slightly on the last word, and she had to swallow hard to continue. "I thought an oak would be fitting, strong and lasting." Samuel paused in his work and looked at her, and the compassion in his eyes was almost too much to bear. "That is a fine tribute, madam. A man could not ask for better. An oak will stand for 100 years or more." "Rose," she said suddenly, "my name is Rose Fairfield, and you do not need to call me madam. It makes me feel older than I am." He gave her that small smile again. "Rose, then, that is a pretty name." They fell into a comfortable silence as he continued working. Rose found herself studying him despite herself, noticing the way his shoulders moved beneath his shirt, the care he took with each swing of the pickaxe, the drops of sweat that ran down his temples. There was something inherently decent about him, she thought. Something kind in the set of his jaw and the gentleness of his hands when he set down the tools. When the hole was deep enough, Samuel helped her unwrap the oak sapling and position it carefully in the ground. His hands were large and calloused but surprisingly gentle as he held the young tree steady while Rose began to fill in the soil around its roots. "A little more to the left," he suggested. "You want it straight up, not leaning." Together they adjusted the tree until it stood perfectly vertical, then finished filling the hole. Samuel packed down the soil firmly with his boots, creating a small basin around the base of the tree that would help catch and hold water. "You will want to water this every day for the first few weeks," he explained. "More if the weather stays hot and dry. The roots need time to establish themselves." Rose nodded, committing his instructions to memory. When the work was done, they both stood back and looked at the newly planted oak. It seemed small and vulnerable in the vast Texas landscape, but there was something hopeful about it too, something that spoke of futures and growth and life continuing despite loss. "Thank you," Rose said, and the words felt inadequate for the service he had rendered. "I could not have done this without you." Samuel picked up his hat, which he had set aside while working, and turned it in his hands. He seemed to be wrestling with something, and when he spoke, his words came out slowly, as if he was choosing them with care. "Miss Rose, I do not mean to presume, and please tell me if I am overstepping, but do you have help with your homestead? Someone to assist with the heavy work?" Rose stiffened, her pride rising up despite her exhaustion. "I am managing." "I am sure you are," he said quickly. "That was not what I meant. It is just that this is hard country for anyone alone, man or woman. I saw some fencing that needs mending as I rode up. And if your husband passed only 6 weeks ago, there is probably other work that has been neglected, not through any fault of yours, but simply because there are only so many hours in a day and you are one person." Everything he said was true, but Rose felt the familiar sting of tears again. "I cannot afford to hire help," she admitted. Thomas left me the homestead clear, no debts, but there is not much money beyond that. I have been selling eggs in town and doing some sewing work, but it barely covers supplies." Samuel was quiet for a moment, still turning his hat in his hands. Then he looked up at her, and there was something almost vulnerable in his expression. "I have been on the trail for 3 months," he said. "Living rough, eating dust, sleeping on the hard ground. The truth is, I am tired of drifting. I was heading to Fort Worth because that is where the work is, but there is nothing waiting for me there specifically, no family or friends. Just another cattle drive or ranch job, more of the same." He paused, then continued. "What if I stayed here for a while, helped you get the homestead back in order? You could pay me in room and board, and when the work is done, if you have no further need of me, I will move on." Rose stared at him, torn between hope and fear. The offer was generous, perhaps too generous. "You do not even know me. Why would you do this?" "I do not rightly know," Samuel admitted, and there was a hint of wonder in his voice, as if he was surprising himself. "But when I saw you struggling out here alone, trying to plant that tree for your husband, it moved something in me. You remind me of my own mother in a way. She was widowed when I was 16, left with 4 children and a failing farm in Georgia. The neighbors helped where they could, but it was never enough. She worked herself near to death trying to keep us all fed and clothed." His voice grew rough with emotion. "I was the oldest, but I was just a boy, not man enough yet to do what needed doing. By the time I was old enough to be real help, she had already worn herself down to nothing. She passed when I was 19, and I have always wondered if things might have been different if someone had stepped in sooner, given her a real hand up instead of just charity." Rose felt her resistance crumbling. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, hear the truth in his words, and the practical part of her brain was screaming that she needed help, that she could not do this alone, that winter would come eventually, and she was already barely holding on in spring. "I have a spare room," she said slowly. "Thomas's brother used to visit sometimes before he moved to California. The room is small, but it has a bed and a window." Samuel's face lit up with a smile that transformed it completely, and Rose felt her breath catch at the sight. He was handsome, she realized, truly handsome when he smiled like that. "That sounds like a palace compared to sleeping on the ground," he said. "Thank you, Miss Rose. I promise you will not regret this." She hoped he was right. Samuel proved his worth within the first hour. After settling his horse and mule in the small barn behind the house, he walked the property with Rose, taking stock of what needed attention. The fencing, as he had noted, was in poor repair in several places. One section of the barn roof was sagging and needed new boards. The chicken coop had a hole that was letting in predators, explaining why Rose had lost several hens in recent weeks. The vegetable garden was struggling, choked with weeds that she had not had time to pull. "It is a lot," Samuel said, but his tone was matter of fact, not discouraging. "But nothing that cannot be fixed with time and elbow grease. The good news is your house is solid, and the well is sound. Those are the most important things." They went into the house so Rose could show him the spare room. It was indeed small, barely large enough for the narrow bed, a chest of drawers and a washstand, but Samuel looked around it as if it was the finest hotel room. "This will do perfectly," he assured her. "Better than perfect, honestly." Rose showed him where she kept the linens, feeling suddenly awkward and uncertain. It had been just her and Thomas in this house, and before that, just her alone after her parents died. Having another person here, a man she had only just met, felt strange and intimate in a way that made her nervous. "I will make supper around 6, she said, falling back on the practical matters. "Do you have any foods you cannot eat?" "Madam, I have been eating trail food for months. Whatever you cook will be like a feast to me." That evening, Rose made a simple meal of fried chicken, biscuits, and greens from her struggling garden, along with preserves she had put up last summer. Samuel ate with the enthusiasm of a man who had indeed been living on hardtack and beans for far too long, and his genuine appreciation for the food eased some of her nervousness. "This is delicious," he said, and she could tell he meant it. "You are a fine cook, Miss Rose." "Thank you," she said, feeling a small glow of pleasure at the compliment. Thomas had rarely commented on her cooking, taking it for granted the way he took for granted most of the domestic work she did. After supper, Samuel insisted on helping with the dishes despite her protests. They worked side by side at the basin, Rose washing and Samuel drying, and she found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the task. He told her about the cattle drive, about the long days and longer nights, about the river crossings and storms and the sheer boredom of watching cattle graze. "Why do you do it then?" Rose asked. "If it is so difficult." Samuel was quiet for a moment, drying a plate with more attention than the task required. "I suppose because I am good at it and because I have not known what else to do with myself. After my mother died, I could not stay in Georgia. Too many memories, and my siblings had scattered to their own lives. So I drifted west, picked up work where I could find it. It has been 6 years of that now, and I am getting tired of moving." "What would you do if you were not drifting?" Rose asked, surprising herself with the personal question. He looked at her, and in the lamplight his eyes seemed to hold depths she had not noticed before. "I think I would like to have a place of my own someday. Not a big ranch, nothing fancy, just enough land for some cattle, maybe horses, a house with a real bed and a woman to share it with." He flushed slightly, as if realizing how that sounded. "Sorry, that was probably too forward." "No," Rose said softly. "It sounds like a good dream." That night, lying alone in the bed she had shared with Thomas, Rose stared at the ceiling and thought about the strange turn her day had taken. She had started the morning alone and struggling, certain she would fail at even the simple task of planting a tree. Now there was a stranger sleeping in her guest room, a man who had appeared like some character from a fairy tale to help her in her time of need. She thought about Thomas, about the marriage they had shared. It had been practical more than romantic. They had met when her parents were both dying of influenza, and he had been kind to her, helping with their care. When they passed, leaving her alone at 19, Thomas had proposed marriage. He was 15 years older, steady and reliable, and she had accepted because the alternative was being completely alone in a harsh world. She had respected him, even cared for him in a way, but she was not sure she had ever truly loved him with the passion she had read about in books. Now he was gone, and she felt guilty for noticing that Samuel Vance had kind eyes and a gentle smile. The next morning, Samuel was up before dawn. Rose woke to the sound of hammering and found him already at work, repairing the chicken coop. She made breakfast for both of them, eggs and bacon and fresh biscuits, and they ate together as the sun rose over the flat Texas landscape. "I was thinking," Samuel said, "that after I finish the chicken coop, I should focus on that fence along the western boundary. If you are planning to keep livestock, you need secure fencing." "I only have 3 milk cows right now," Rose said, "and the chickens." "That is a start," Samuel said, "but this land could support more. You have good grazing here and water access. You could build up a decent herd over time, maybe some pigs as well. Diversify your income." Rose felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. "I have thought about that, but I do not know much about raising cattle beyond the basics." "I could teach you," Samuel offered, "if you wanted to learn." Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Samuel worked on the most pressing repairs while Rose tended to the household tasks and her small egg business. But increasingly, she found herself working alongside him, learning as he taught her about fence building and livestock care, and the 100 small skills needed to run a homestead successfully. Samuel was a patient teacher, never condescending or dismissive of her questions. He showed her how to properly set fence posts, how to recognize signs of illness in cattle, how to judge the quality of hay. In turn, Rose found herself opening up to him in ways she had not opened up to anyone in years, telling him about her childhood, her parents, her dreams of someday having children and a family of her own. "You want children?" Samuel asked one afternoon as they worked together in the garden, pulling weeds and thinning the vegetable plants. Rose felt her cheeks warm, but she answered honestly, "I do. Thomas and I tried, but it never happened. The doctor in town said sometimes these things just take time, but then Thomas got sick." She paused, her hands stilling in the dirt. "Sometimes I wonder if there is something wrong with me." "There is nothing wrong with you," Samuel said firmly. "These things happen in their own time, according to God's plan." "Do you want children?" she asked, turning the question back on him. His face softened. "I do. Someday. When I have a home to bring them into and a wife who wants them as much as I do." Their eyes met, and Rose felt something pass between them, a current of possibility that made her pulse quicken. She looked away quickly, confused by her own reaction. It had only been 2 months since Thomas died. She should not be having these feelings, but she was. As the days turned into weeks, Rose found herself looking forward to Samuel's company more than she wanted to admit. He had a way of making even the hardest work seem lighter, often singing old trail songs as he labored or telling stories that made her laugh. She had not realized how much she had missed laughter until Samuel brought it back into her life. One evening, about 3 weeks after he had arrived, they were sitting on the porch after supper, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink. Samuel had brought his guitar from his pack, an old battered instrument that nevertheless produced sweet music, and he played softly as the light faded. "My mother taught me," he said when Rose complimented his playing. "She said music was good for the soul, especially in hard times." "She was right," Rose said. "Your mother sounds like she was a wonderful woman." "She was," Samuel said, his fingers stilling on the strings. "I wish you could have met her. I think she would have liked you." Rose felt that flutter in her chest again, stronger this time. "Why do you say that?" Samuel looked at her, and in the fading light his eyes were dark and serious. "Because you are strong and kind and you do not give up even when things are hard. Those were the qualities she valued most in people." "I do not feel very strong," Rose admitted. "Most days I feel like I am barely holding on." "Strength is not about never struggling," Samuel said. "It is about getting up every morning and trying again despite everything. You have been doing that every day since your husband passed. That takes real courage." Rose felt tears prick her eyes at his words. No one had told her she was doing a good job, that her efforts mattered. She had felt so alone in her grief and struggle, and hearing Samuel acknowledge how hard she had been working meant more than she could express. "Thank you," she whispered. Samuel reached over and gently squeezed her hand, just for a moment, but the touch sent warmth through her entire body. When he released her hand, she felt the loss of that contact like a physical thing. That night, lying in bed, Rose had to face the truth she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with Samuel Vance. It terrified her. She felt like she was betraying Thomas's memory, even though rationally she knew that Thomas would not have wanted her to mourn forever. And what if Samuel did not feel the same way? He had been nothing but kind and helpful, but perhaps that was just his nature. Perhaps he saw her only as an employer, or at best a friend. The thought that he might leave when the work was done, that he might mount his horse and ride out of her life as suddenly as he had entered it, made her chest ache. She resolved to guard her heart better, to maintain proper distance. But the next morning, when she came out to find Samuel already up and making coffee, his hair mussed from sleep and his smile warm and welcoming, all her resolutions crumbled. "Morning," he said, pouring her a cup. "I thought I would get a head start today. I want to finish that section of roof on the barn." "You have been working so hard," Rose said. "You should take a day to rest." Samuel shook his head. "I do not mind the work. Honestly, I am enjoying it. There is something satisfying about fixing things, making them better. And spending time here with you has been good for me too. I have not felt this settled in a long while." The words gave Rose a small thrill of hope. Before she could respond, Samuel continued, "Actually, I have been meaning to talk to you about something." Rose's heart began to pound. "Oh." "I was in town yesterday getting supplies, and I heard talk about a cattle auction next month. Good quality stock at fair prices. I was thinking, if you were interested, we could attend and maybe pick up a few head to start building up your herd properly. I have some money saved from the cattle drive, enough to invest in 3 or 4 good cows. I would be willing to put that in if you would consider taking me on as a partner rather than just hired help." Rose stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "A partner?" Samuel looked nervous now, his usual confidence wavering. "I know it is a lot to ask, and if you are not comfortable with the idea, I understand. But I have been thinking about what I want for my future, and I realize that I do not want to leave here. This place, this work, it all feels right to me in a way nothing has felt right in years." He took a deep breath. "I would like to stay, Miss Rose, not just until the repairs are done, but permanently, as your partner in the homestead if you will have me." Rose's mind was racing. What he was proposing was essentially a business partnership, but the way he had said, "You," made it feel like more than that. Or was she reading too much into his words, hearing what she wanted to hear? "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "This is so sudden." "I know," Samuel said quickly. "And I do not expect an answer right away. Think about it. Consider whether it makes sense for you, but I want you to know that I am serious about this. I am not a man who makes offers lightly." Over the next few days, Rose did think about it. She thought about little else, in fact. The practical side of her recognized what a good opportunity this was. Samuel was hardworking, skilled, and trustworthy. With his help and investment, she could transform the struggling homestead into a genuinely profitable operation. She would not have to worry about how to manage alone, about what would happen when the heavy work of harvest and winter preparation came. But the emotional side of her wanted to know what his offer really meant. Did he want to be her business partner, or did he want something more? And what did she want? 1 week after Samuel's proposal, Rose was working in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread, when she heard a rider approaching. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door, surprised to see Judith Martin, one of the women from town, dismounting from her horse. "Judith," Rose said, coming out to greet her. "This is an unexpected pleasure." Judith was a handsome woman in her 40s, the wife of the town's general store owner. She had been kind to Rose after Thomas's death, bringing by food and offering condolences. But there was something in her expression now that made Rose wary. "Rose, dear," Judith said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I hope I am not intruding, but I felt I should come speak with you. There has been talk in town." Rose's stomach sank. "Talk about the man staying with you." "Samuel Vance. People are saying he is living in your house, that the two of you are alone here together without proper chaperone." Judith paused, her eyes gleaming with malicious interest. "You must understand how that looks, dear. Your husband has been gone only 2 months. It is not decent." Rose felt anger rise in her chest, hot and fierce. Samuel has been helping me with repairs to the homestead. He has been nothing but respectful and proper. I am sure he has, Judith said, though her tone suggested she believed no such thing. But appearances matter, Rose. You are a young widow and you must be careful of your reputation. If people think you are carrying on with this cowboy, no decent man will ever consider courting you. I am not looking to be courted, Rose said, her voice tight. Not now, perhaps, Judith said. But what about in a year or 2 years? You will want to marry again eventually. You cannot run this place alone forever, but no respectable man will want damaged goods. The phrase hit Rose like a slap. Damaged goods. As if she was something spoiled and worthless because she dared to have a man help her with her homestead. I think you should leave, Rose said quietly, but with steel in her voice. Judith's eyebrows rose. I am only trying to help you, dear. I would hate to see you ruin yourself. Please leave. After Judith rode away, Rose stood on the porch, shaking with anger and humiliation. She knew how small towns worked, knew how quickly gossip could spread and destroy a reputation. She had thought she was being careful, maintaining propriety by having Samuel stay in the guest room, never allowing any hint of impropriety. But apparently, that was not enough for people like Judith Martin. Samuel came around the corner of the house, carrying lumber for the barn roof repair. He saw her face and immediately set down the wood, coming to her quickly. Rose, what happened? Are you all right? She told him about Judith's visit, the words tumbling out in a rush. Samuel's expression grew dark with anger as he listened. That is ridiculous, he said when she finished. We have done nothing wrong. Anyone with eyes can see that I am here doing honest work. It does not matter what is true, Rose said bitterly. It matters what people believe, what they want to believe. And apparently they want to believe that I am some fallen woman carrying on with a cowboy. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he said, There is one way to stop the talk. Rose looked at him questioningly. We could get married. The words hung in the air between them, and Rose felt as if the world had tilted on its axis. What? Samuel took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. Rose, I have been trying to work up the courage to say this for days now. When I talked about being your partner, I was not just talking about the homestead. I meant a full partnership in every way. You want to marry me? Rose whispered, afraid to believe what she was hearing. More than I have ever wanted anything, Samuel said, and his voice was rough with emotion. I know the timing is not ideal. I know your husband has only been gone 2 months, and I know I am probably rushing this. But Rose, from the moment I saw you trying to plant that tree, struggling alone but refusing to give up, something in my heart recognized you. These past weeks, getting to know you, working beside you, learning your mind and your heart, I have fallen completely in love with you. Rose felt tears streaming down her cheeks. I thought I was being disloyal to Thomas's memory by having feelings for you. I felt so guilty. And now, Samuel asked softly, now I realize that Thomas would not have wanted me to be alone and miserable. He would have wanted me to be happy. She looked up into Samuel's gray-blue eyes and said the words that had been locked in her heart for weeks. I love you too, Samuel. I think I started falling for you that first day when you helped me plant the oak tree. Samuel's face transformed with joy, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Rose pressed her face against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, breathing in the scent of him, sun and leather and honest sweat. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt truly safe. Will you marry me? Samuel asked, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. Not because of what people are saying, though that is a convenient excuse, but because I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Because I want to build a future with you, raise children with you, grow old with you. "Yes," Rose said, smiling through her tears. "Yes, I will marry you." Samuel kissed her then, gentle at first, almost tentative, as if he was afraid she might break. But when Rose responded, wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him back, the kiss deepened, becoming a promise of all the passion and partnership to come. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I will make you happy," he promised. "I swear it." "You already have," Rose said. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Wyatt, with Reverend Thompson presiding. Rose wore a simple dress of pale blue, having decided that black felt wrong for a new beginning. Samuel wore his best shirt and trousers, his hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving Rose's face as they spoke their vows. Not everyone in town approved, of course. Judith Martin and her circle of friends whispered about unseemly haste and impropriety. But there were others who were genuinely happy for them, who saw the love between Rose and Samuel as a good thing, a hope emerging from tragedy. After the ceremony, they held a small reception at the homestead. Samuel's face had been full of wonder as he carried Rose over the threshold of what was now their home. And that night, when they came together as husband and wife, it was with a tenderness and passion that made Rose understand what all the romantic poems had been talking about. "I love you," Samuel whispered in the darkness, his hand gentle on her face. "My Rose, I love you," she whispered back. "My Samuel." In the morning, Rose woke to find Samuel already up, standing at the window and looking out at the land that was now officially theirs together. She joined him, and he wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I was thinking about that oak tree," he said. "The one we planted for Thomas. It is doing well, putting down roots." Rose smiled. "You have been watering it every day, just like you told me to do." "I have," Samuel admitted. "But I was thinking maybe we should plant another one, near the house where we can watch it grow, a tree for us for our future." Rose felt her heart swell with love for this man who understood the importance of symbols and remembrance. "I would like that very much." They planted the second oak tree together that afternoon, a young sapling that Samuel had purchased in town and kept as a surprise for after the wedding. They worked side by side, just as they had that first day, but this time the work was filled with joy rather than sorrow. "This one will be for our children," Samuel said as they packed the soil around the roots, "so they can climb it when they are young and sit in its shade when they are grown." "How many children are you imagining?" Rose asked, amused. Samuel grinned at her. "At least 3 or 4. This is a big house, needs filling up with noise and laughter." "That is ambitious," Rose said, but she was smiling. She wanted children too, wanted the family she had always dreamed of. "We had better get started then," Samuel said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Rose blushed but laughed. This man, this unexpected gift that had come into her life when she needed him most, had taught her that it was possible to grieve the past while still embracing the future. Thomas would always have a place in her heart and her memory, marked by the oak tree growing tall and strong. But there was room in her heart for new love too, for the man who stood beside her now, looking at their tree, their future, with hope shining in his eyes. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Rose's life. She and Samuel worked the homestead together, building it up from a struggling operation into something genuinely prosperous. They attended the cattle auction Samuel had mentioned and purchased 5 good-quality cows, the beginning of a herd that would grow steadily over the coming years. They repaired every building, replaced all the fencing, and expanded the vegetable garden. But it was not just the physical improvements that made Rose happy. It was the partnership she and Samuel had created, the way they worked together toward common goals, the way they talked through decisions and respected each other's opinions. It was the laughter they shared over meals, the quiet evenings on the porch watching the sun set, the passion they found in each other's arms at night. Rose had thought herself content in her marriage to Thomas, but now she understood the difference between contentment and true joy. With Samuel, she felt fully alive, fully herself. He encouraged her dreams and ambitions, never tried to make her less than she was. When she expressed interest in learning to rope and ride better, he taught her patiently. When she had an idea for improving their operation, he listened seriously and helped her implement it. 6 months after their wedding, Rose realized she was pregnant. She had been feeling tired and queasy in the mornings, and when the signs became unmistakable, she felt a joy so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She waited until evening to tell Samuel, wanting the moment to be special. They were sitting on the porch after supper, their usual ritual, watching the stars come out in the vast Texas sky. The 2 oak trees were visible in the gathering darkness, both growing strong and healthy. "Samuel," Rose said, taking his hand, "I have something to tell you." He looked at her, and even in the dim light she could see the sudden intensity of his attention. "What is it?" "I am going to have a baby." For a moment, Samuel was utterly still, as if he had forgotten how to breathe. Then he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to town and scooped Rose up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby. Rose, you have made me the happiest man alive." He set her down gently as if she was suddenly made of glass and immediately began fussing over her. "You should sit down. Are you feeling all right? Do you need anything? Should I get the doctor?" Rose laughed at his concern even as she was touched by it. "I am fine, Samuel. Pregnancy is natural, not an illness." "I know, but still. You have to be careful, no heavy lifting. I will take over all the hard work." "Samuel, I am barely even showing yet. I can still do normal activities." They compromised, with Rose agreeing to take things easier and Samuel agreeing not to treat her like an invalid. Over the following months, as Rose's belly grew round with their child, Samuel was attentive and loving, always making sure she was comfortable, often placing his hand on her stomach to feel the baby move. "It is a miracle," he would say, wonder in his voice. "A whole new person growing right here." Rose would smile and cover his hand with hers, feeling blessed beyond measure. The baby came in early spring of 1879, a boy they named Thomas Samuel, honoring both the past and the present. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Rose was frightened, but Samuel stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, healthy and squalling, Samuel wept openly as he held his son for the first time. "He is perfect," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are perfect. Thank you, Rose. Thank you for this gift." Rose, exhausted but radiantly happy, watched her husband cradle their child and felt that her life had come full circle. She had lost so much, but she had gained so much more. The homestead that had once been a burden was now a thriving ranch. The loneliness that had threatened to consume her had been replaced by love and family. As Thomas Samuel grew from infant to toddler, Rose and Samuel continued to build their life together. They added more cattle, planted more crops, made improvements to the house. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Rose, arrived 2 years after Thomas. Then, 3 years after that, another son they called James. The house that had once been so quiet filled with the noise of children playing, of laughter and occasional tears, of life in all its chaotic beauty. Samuel was a wonderful father, patient and playful, teaching his children to ride and rope. to care for the animals, to work hard but also to find joy in simple pleasures. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised Rose by taking her to the 2 oak trees they had planted. Both had grown considerably, no longer fragile saplings but strong young trees reaching toward the sky. "You remember when we planted these?" Samuel asked, his arm around Rose's waist. "How could I forget?" Rose said. "The first one was one of the hardest days of my life. The second was one of the happiest." "I think about that day often," Samuel said. "How I almost rode past your property, how close I came to not stopping. If I had made that choice, if I had just kept riding to Fort Worth, I would have missed out on the greatest blessing of my life." Rose leaned into him, her heart full. "I think about it too, how you helped me when I needed it most, how you saw me at my lowest and stayed anyway." "I did not stay just to help," Samuel said softly. "I stayed because from that very first day I felt something I had never felt before. It was like coming home, even though I had never been to this place before." "That is what love is," Rose said, "recognizing home in another person." They stood there together, watching their children play in the yard, the sun setting behind them in shades of gold and crimson. The oak tree planted for Thomas stood strong and tall, a lasting memorial to a decent man who had cared for Rose when she needed someone. The oak tree planted for her future with Samuel grew beside it, a symbol of hope and new beginnings and the family they had created together. Rose thought about the woman she had been 2 years ago, struggling alone to dig a hole in the unforgiving Texas soil. She had been broken and grieving, certain that her life held nothing but hardship ahead. She could not have imagined then that a stranger would stop to help, that he would become first a friend, then a partner, then the great love of her life. Life was strange and unpredictable, full of sorrow but also unexpected joy. Thomas's death had been a tragedy, but it had also opened the door for Samuel to enter her life. She would always carry both realities with her, the grief and the gratitude, the past and the present intertwined like the branches of 2 trees growing side by side. "I love you," Rose said to Samuel, the words never losing their power even though she spoke them every day. "I love you too," Samuel replied, kissing the top of her head. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." Little Thomas came running up to them, his face flushed with excitement. "Papa, Papa, can we go riding before it gets dark?" Samuel laughed and scooped up his son. "I suppose we could manage a short ride. What do you say, Rose? Want to join us?" Rose smiled at her husband and son, then looked over to where Sarah and baby James were playing under the watchful eye of the neighbor girl they had hired to help with the children. Her family, her home, her life, all precious beyond measure. "I would love to," she said. As they walked toward the barn together, Rose glanced back one more time at the 2 oak trees. They stood strong and solid, roots deep in the Texas earth, branches reaching toward the endless sky. In 50 years, they would be massive and ancient, providing shade for grandchildren she had not even met yet, standing witness to a love story that had begun with a widow's grief and a cowboy's kindness. She had planted 1 tree for the past, and Samuel had planted 1 for the future. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. And that, Rose thought, was the greatest gift of all. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations, challenges and triumphs. The ranch grew more prosperous with each passing year, their cattle herd expanding until they were among the more successful ranchers in the area. But success never changed Samuel's core character. He remained the same kind, hardworking man who had stopped to help a struggling widow plant a tree. When Thomas Samuel was 7, Sarah 5, and James 3, Rose discovered she was pregnant again. This time, She was less nervous about the news, more confident in her body's ability to bring a child into the world. But this pregnancy was different from the others, harder and more exhausting. She felt ill more often, could not seem to find a comfortable position for sleeping, worried constantly that something was wrong. Samuel was even more attentive than he had been with the previous pregnancies, taking on extra work around the house and with the children so Rose could rest. "Whatever you need," he kept telling her. "You and the baby are what matters most." The midwife, Mrs. Henderson, came out to the ranch regularly to check on Rose. On one visit, when Rose was about 6 months along, Mrs. Henderson examined her thoroughly and then sat back with a knowing smile. "Well, Mrs. Vance, I believe I know why you have been having such a difficult time." Rose felt a spike of fear. "Is something wrong with the baby?" "Not at all, dear. In fact, the babies are doing just fine." "Babies?" Rose whispered. "You are carrying twins," Mrs. Henderson confirmed. "That is why you are so much larger this time, and why you are feeling the quickening so much more strongly." Rose stared at her in shock. Twins. 2 babies at once. The news was overwhelming and exciting and terrifying all at the same time. She could hardly wait to tell Samuel. When he came in from working with the cattle, dusty and tired, Rose met him at the door with tears streaming down her face. Samuel's expression immediately shifted to alarm. "Rose, what is wrong? Is it the baby?" "Babies," Rose said, laughing through her tears. "Samuel, we are having twins." Samuel's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, wonder, and finally pure joy. He let out a laugh and pulled Rose into his arms, careful of her swollen belly, and held her close. "Twins," he repeated, as if testing out the word. "2 babies." "Rose, that is incredible. Terrifying, but incredible." "We are going to need a bigger house," Rose said, the practical concerns already flooding her mind. "Then we will build a bigger house," Samuel said firmly. "Whatever we need to do, we will do it, together." The twins, a boy and a girl, arrived on a stormy night in late November. The birth was the hardest yet, and there were moments when Rose was not sure she would survive it. But Samuel was there, his presence a constant anchor, and Mrs. Henderson was skilled and calm, guiding her through the worst of it. The boy was born first, smaller than his siblings had been, but healthy and strong. They named him Benjamin Samuel. 10 minutes later, his sister followed, tinier still but with a lusty cry that filled the room. They named her Margaret Rose, called Maggie from the start. With 5 children now ranging from newborn to age 7, the house was chaos. But it was joyful chaos, the kind that left Rose exhausted at the end of each day but deeply satisfied. Samuel was a true partner in every sense, changing nappies and walking fussy babies at night, wrangling the older children, and still managing to keep the ranch running smoothly. "I do not know how you do it all," Rose said to him one night, after a particularly difficult day when Maggie had cried for hours with colic and Thomas Samuel had fallen out of a tree and needed stitches. "The same way you do," Samuel said, pulling her close as they lay in bed, both too tired to do more than hold each other. "Love and stubbornness and the grace of God." When the twins were 6 months old, Samuel came to Rose with a proposition. "I have been thinking," he said. "We have worked so hard these past years, building up the ranch, raising our family. We have been blessed beyond what I ever dreamed possible. I think it is time we did something for others." "What did you have about in mind?" Rose asked. "You know the old Miller place, the one that has been sitting empty since old Walt died?" Rose nodded. The Miller homestead was about 5 miles east of their property, a decent piece of land that had fallen into disrepair after its owner passed away with no heirs. "I was thinking we could buy it," Samuel continued. "Fix it up and offer it to someone who needs a fresh start. Maybe a widow or widower, or a young couple just starting out. Someone like you were when I found you, or like I was when I was drifting without purpose. We could give them a chance to build something of their own. Rose felt her eyes fill with tears. This was why she loved this man, why she would love him for the rest of her life. He had not forgotten where he came from, what it felt like to need help. Success had not made him selfish or proud. "That is a beautiful idea," she said. "Let us do it." Over the next year, they purchased the Miller property and spent their spare time and resources fixing it up. It was not easy with 5 young children and a ranch to run, but they managed, often bringing the children along to help with simple tasks. Rose wanted them to understand the importance of helping others, of using their blessings to bless those less fortunate. When the homestead was ready, they put out word through Reverend Thompson that they were looking for someone who needed a place. Several families applied, and after careful consideration, they chose a young widow named Emily Carson, who had 3 children of her own and had been struggling to make ends meet after her husband died in a mining accident. The day they handed Emily the key to the homestead, watching her face light up with hope and disbelief, Rose felt a peace settle over her that was almost overwhelming. This was why Samuel had stopped to help her plant that tree all those years ago. Not just for her benefit, but so they could eventually help others in turn. One act of kindness rippling outward in ever-widening circles. "Thank you," Emily kept saying, tears streaming down her face. "I cannot believe you would do this for me, for my children. You do not even know us." "Someone did something similar for me once," Rose said, glancing at Samuel who stood beside her, his hand in hers. "He helped me when I needed it most, and it changed my life. Now we are just passing that gift forward." As Rose and Samuel drove back to their ranch, their children in the wagon bed behind them chattering about the Carson children they had met, Samuel squeezed her hand. "You ever think about where we would be if I had ridden past that day?" he asked. "Sometimes," Rose admitted. "But then I remember that you did not ride past. You stopped, you helped, and everything that came after was a result of that one choice." "The best choice I ever made," Samuel said. "The best thing that ever happened to me," Rose replied. They passed the 2 oak trees as they approached the house. Both were tall and strong now, their branches spreading wide. Thomas Samuel had already started climbing the one they had planted for the future, despite Rose's protests that he was still too young. Sarah loved to sit beneath it and read, finding peace in the shade. The younger children would join them in a few years, and the cycle would continue. The tree planted for Thomas stood as it always had, a quiet memorial to a man who had been good and kind in his own way, who had given Rose security when she needed it. She still visited that tree sometimes, still spoke to Thomas in her mind, thanking him for the role he had played in her life, asking for his blessing on the family she had built after he was gone. She liked to think he was proud of her, that he approved of Samuel and the children, that he was glad she had found happiness again. Thomas had been a practical man, and practically speaking, he would have wanted her to remarry, to have help with the homestead, to not be alone. That she had found love in the bargain was a gift, but a gift Thomas would have been glad she received. More years passed, marked by the growth of the oak trees and the growth of the children. Thomas Samuel grew tall and strong like his father, learning the ranching business with enthusiasm and skill. Sarah was quieter, more thoughtful, with a gift for managing the household accounts that amazed both her parents. James was the adventurous one, always getting into mischief, but impossible to stay angry at because of his infectious laugh. Benjamin and Maggie were inseparable as twins often are, finishing each other's sentences and seeming to communicate without words. On Rose and Samuel's 10th wedding anniversary, he surprised her with a photograph. It was a new luxury, having photographs taken, and they had to travel all the way to Dallas to find a photographer. But Samuel had insisted, saying he wanted to capture this moment in their lives, with all the children still young, before time carried them forward into the unknown future. The photograph showed the whole family standing in front of their house, the 2 oak trees visible in the background. Samuel stood tall and proud, his arm around Rose's waist. She looked happy and prosperous in her best dress, her hair styled carefully, laugh lines visible at the corners of her eyes. The children were arranged around them, from Thomas Samuel at age 12 down to the twins at age 5, all looking reasonably presentable, despite the usual squirming and fidgeting that happened when children were told to stay still. "This is our legacy," Samuel said, looking at the photograph after it arrived in the mail weeks later. "This moment, this family, this life we built together." "From a hole in the ground and a tree that needed planting," Rose said softly. "From a choice to stop and help," Samuel corrected. "From a choice to accept help when it was offered." Rose looked at her husband, at the man who had become the center of her world, and felt gratitude wash over her like a wave. They had been through so much together. The births of their children, the hard winters when money was tight, the storms that damaged crops, the illnesses that frightened them but that their children always recovered from, the triumphs and setbacks that marked any life fully lived. Through it all, they had loved each other. Not just the passionate love of their early days, though that had never completely faded, but the deeper love that came from truly knowing another person, from choosing them again and again through all of life's trials. "I would do it all again," Rose said. "Every hard moment, every struggle, every fear, I would do it all again to end up right here with you." "As would I," Samuel said, pulling her close and kissing her forehead. "As would I." When Thomas Samuel was 16, a young man now and no longer a boy, he came to his parents with a question that had clearly been weighing on him. "I want to know about the man I was named for," he said. "My birth father. You have told me some things over the years, but I want to know more." Rose felt her breath catch. She had always known this conversation would come eventually, but that did not make it any easier. She looked at Samuel, who nodded encouragingly. "Of course," Rose said, settling into a chair. "Sit down and I will tell you about Thomas Fairfield." She told their eldest son about the man who had married her when she was alone and frightened, who had given her security and kindness if not passionate love. She told him about Thomas's steady nature, his hard work, his dreams of having trees around the property. She told him about the fever that took him, and about her own grief and struggle afterward. "He was a good man," Rose concluded. "He was not perfect, none of us are, but he was good and decent, and he cared for me when I needed someone. You carry his name, and you should be proud of that." Thomas Samuel was quiet for a long moment, processing what he had heard. Then he looked at Samuel, the man who had raised him, and asked, "Did you ever resent me for carrying another man's name?" Samuel's face softened with love. "Never, not even for a moment. You are my son in every way that matters. I held you when you were born. I walked the floor with you when you were sick. I taught you to ride and rope and to be a good man. The name you carry honors the past, but the man you are becoming is a result of the present. There is room in this family for both legacies." Thomas Samuel nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I am lucky," he said. "Some boys only get one good father. I got two." Rose reached out and took her son's hand, overwhelmed with emotion. This was what healing looked like, she thought. Not forgetting the past or pretending it did not happen, but integrating it into the present, honoring what was while embracing what is. As Thomas Samuel grew into a man and began courting a girl from town, as Sarah started teaching at the local school, as the younger children moved through their own stages of growth and development. Rose and Samuel continued to work side by side, partners in every sense of the word. They expanded the ranch further, bought more land, became one of the most successful operations in the area. But they never forgot where they came from, and they continued to help others whenever they could. The Miller place, where Emily Carson and her children had thrived, became the first of several homesteads they helped struggling families acquire and improve. "We are building something bigger than just our own success," Samuel said one evening as they reviewed their accounts and planned their next charitable project. "We are building a community of people who help each other, who lift each other up." "That is your legacy," Rose said. "Not just the ranch or the money or the land, but the lives you have touched, the people you have helped." "Our legacy," Samuel corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you." On their 15th wedding anniversary, they took a rare day off from work to have a picnic, just the two of them, under the oak tree they had planted for their future. The children were old enough now to manage without them for an afternoon, and Rose had packed a basket with all of Samuel's favorite foods. They sat in the shade of the tree they had planted, and Rose marveled at how much it had grown. Its trunk was thick and solid now, its branches spreading wide and strong. She remembered when it had been nothing but a fragile sapling that looked like it might blow over in a strong wind. "You remember what you said when we planted this tree?" Rose asked Samuel. "I said it was for our children," Samuel recalled, "so they could climb it when they were young and sit in its shade when they were grown." "Thomas has already been climbing it for years," Rose said with a smile. "And Sarah reads under it all the time. I think your wish came true." "My wishes have all come true," Samuel said, lying back on the blanket they had spread beneath the tree and pulling Rose down beside him. "Every single one. I have you, I have our children, I have a home and work that matters. What more could a man ask for?" "What about your wish for 3 or 4 children?" Rose teased. "We overshot that goal by one." Samuel laughed, a deep rumbling sound that Rose felt through her whole body where she lay against his chest. "Best miscalculation I ever made." They lay there in comfortable silence, listening to the rustle of leaves above them, the distant lowing of cattle, the birdsong that filled the air. This was peace, Rose thought. This was contentment, not the absence of struggle or hardship, but the presence of love and purpose and connection. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Rose asked suddenly. "The one where you were free to drift wherever you wanted, no responsibilities tying you down?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "No," he finally said. "I thought that was freedom back then. Drifting from place to place, job to job, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But it was not freedom. It was loneliness dressed up as adventure. Real freedom is what I have now, the freedom to love and be loved, to build something lasting, to wake up every morning knowing exactly where I belong." Rose propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, this man she loved more with each passing year. "You belong here," she said. "With me, with our children, with this land and this life we built together." "I belong with you," Samuel corrected, reaching up to cup her face. "Wherever you are, that is where I belong." He pulled her down for a kiss, sweet and tender, full of the love they had nurtured for 15 years. When they finally pulled apart, Rose rested her head on his chest again, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For stopping that day. For seeing me when I was at my lowest and choosing to help. For staying when you could have left. For loving me and our children so completely. For being the man you are." Samuel's arms tightened around her. "Thank you for letting me help. For trusting me when you had every reason not to. For building this life with me. for giving me everything I never knew I needed." As the sun moved across the sky and the afternoon wore on, they continued to lie beneath the tree they had planted together. Two souls who had found each other in the most unexpected way and built something beautiful from a chance encounter and a shared task. The oak tree planted for Thomas still stood strong nearby, a permanent memorial to the past and the different path Rose's life had taken before Samuel arrived. Both trees were important, both part of the story, neither negating the other. The past and the present, grief and joy, endings and beginnings, all woven together into the rich tapestry of a life fully lived. As Rose and Samuel finally packed up their picnic and headed back to the house, they walked past both oak trees, and Rose felt a deep sense of rightness settle over her. This was how it was supposed to be. The past honored, the present celebrated, the future full of promise. The years continued their steady march forward. Thomas Samuel married his sweetheart and started his own ranch on land his parents gifted him. Sarah married a doctor from Dallas and moved to the city, though she visited often. James, true to his adventurous nature, joined the Texas Rangers and sent letters home from all over the state. The twins, Benjamin and Maggie, remained on the home ranch, Benjamin learning the business from Samuel and Maggie helping Rose with the household and charitable work. Rose and Samuel became grandparents, a role they embraced with joy and enthusiasm. Thomas Samuel and his wife had 4 children in quick succession, keeping the family tradition of large broods alive. Sarah had 3, all bookish and serious like their mother. Even James, despite his wandering ways, eventually settled down with a spirited woman he met in Austin, and they started their own family. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The house that had once seemed too large with just Rose and Thomas now bulged at the seams with children and grandchildren, with laughter and noise and chaos. Samuel stood at the head of the table during the anniversary dinner, his hair now streaked with gray but his eyes still the same clear gray-blue that had captured Rose's heart all those years ago. He raised his glass in a toast. 25 years ago, I was a drifter with no home and no purpose beyond the next job. Then I met a woman struggling to plant a tree and everything changed. Rose, you gave me a home and a family, love and purpose, a life I never dreamed I could have. These 25 years have been the greatest blessing of my existence, and I look forward to spending however many years God grants us continuing to build this life together. To my wife, my partner, the love of my life. To Rose, the family chorused, raising their glasses. Rose felt tears streaming down her face as she looked around the table at all the faces gathered there. These people, this family, had grown from a single choice Samuel made to stop and help, from her decision to accept that help, from their mutual recognition of something special between them. She thought about the woman she had been 27 years ago, newly widowed and struggling alone. She could never have imagined this future, this abundance of love and family. The journey had not always been easy. There had been hard times, moments of doubt and fear, losses that hurt deeply. But through it all, she had Samuel by her side, and that had made all the difference. Later that evening, after the guests had departed, and the house was finally quiet, Rose and Samuel walked out to visit the 2 oak trees. It had become a tradition over the years, this pilgrimage to the trees that marked the turning points of Rose's life. Both trees were massive now, their trunks thick and gnarled, their branches spreading wide to create pools of shade. Children and grandchildren had carved their initials into the bark over the years, layers of family history written in wood and time. 25 years, Rose said, leaning against Samuel as they stood between the two trees. "Where did the time go?" "Into this," Samuel said, gesturing at the trees, at the house beyond with lights glowing in the windows, at the land that had become their legacy. "Into everything we built together. You remember what you told me the day we planted this tree?" Rose asked, placing her hand on the trunk of the oak they had planted for their future. "You said it would be for our children to climb and sit under." "And it has been," Samuel said with satisfaction, "exactly as I hoped." "You also told me the one planted for Thomas would stand for 100 years or more." "And it will," Samuel confirmed. "Long after we are gone, these trees will still be here, marking our time on this earth, sheltering generations we will never meet." Rose felt a bittersweet ache in her chest. The thought of being gone, of Samuel being gone, was painful despite its inevitability. But there was comfort, too, in knowing that they would leave something lasting behind, that their love and their work would continue to matter long after they had passed on. "When I am gone," Rose said softly, "I want to be buried here between these two trees, between the past and the future, with both the men I loved nearby." Samuel pulled her close. "That is still a long time off, my love. We have many years ahead of us yet." "I know," Rose said. "But when that time comes, that is where I want to be." "Then that is where you will be," Samuel promised. "And when my time comes, I will be right beside you for all eternity." They stood there in the gathering darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a family from grief and hope, and a shared determination to make something good from difficult circumstances. The oak trees stood silent witness to their love, as they had for a quarter-century, as they would for long years to come. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and Rose and Samuel continued their work, their partnership as strong as ever despite the advancing years. They slowed down some, as was natural, letting the younger generation take on more of the physical labor. But they remained the heart of the ranch, the wellspring of wisdom and experience that everyone turned to when difficulties arose. On their 30th anniversary, Rose woke to find Samuel already up, standing at the window and looking out at the land as he had so many mornings over the years. But there was something different in his posture, a tension that worried her. "Samuel, are you all right?" He turned to her and she saw pain flash across his face before he mastered it. "Just a bit of discomfort in my chest, nothing to worry about." But Rose did worry. She insisted he see the doctor, and after a thorough examination, they received news that chilled her to the bone. Samuel's heart was weakening. The doctor could not say how much time he had, but he cautioned Samuel to take things easy, to avoid overexertion, to prepare for the possibility that his time might be shorter than they had hoped. Samuel took the news with the same steady calm he brought to everything, but Rose could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear that gripped her own heart. Not fear of death itself, but fear of separation, of leaving or being left behind. "We have had 30 good years," Samuel said that night as they lay in bed, holding each other close. "That is more than many people get." "It is not enough," Rose said fiercely. "I need more time with you. I need forever." "Then we will make the most of whatever time we have," Samuel said. "No regrets, no taking each other for granted. We will live every day fully." And they did. Samuel cut back on the physical labor but remained active in the management of the ranch. They spent more time together, taking long walks, sitting under the oak trees, visiting with children and grandchildren, reviewing the photo albums that documented their life together. Rose found herself memorizing everything about him. The way his laugh lines crinkled around his eyes, the sound of his voice in the morning, the feel of his hand in hers, the smell of his skin. She was terrified of forgetting, of losing these precious details to time and grief. But Samuel did not weaken as quickly as the doctor had feared. His heart condition was stable, and with care and medication he continued on. 2 years passed, then 3, then 5. They celebrated their 35th anniversary surrounded by family, grateful for the bonus time they had been granted. "Every day with you is a gift," Samuel told Rose that night. "I do not take a single moment for granted." "Nor do I," Rose said, holding him close. They were granted 10 more years beyond that dire diagnosis. 10 years of sunrises and sunsets, of grandchildren growing up and great-grandchildren being born, of watching the ranch continue to thrive under Benjamin's management, of seeing their charitable work expand to help dozens of families over the years. Samuel was 69 and Rose was 66 when his heart finally gave out. It happened peacefully, on a warm spring evening as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. One moment he was there, his hand in hers, commenting on the beautiful colors in the sky. The next moment he simply slumped against her, his breathing stopped, his journey on this earth complete. Rose held him as the sun finished setting, as the stars came out one by one, as the night deepened around them. She held him and wept and told him over and over how much she loved him, how grateful she was for every moment they had shared, how he had saved her and made her life worth living. The family gathered for the funeral, and Samuel was buried exactly where he had promised, between the 2 oak trees that had marked the turning points of Rose's life. The trees were ancient now, their branches spreading so wide that they nearly touched, creating a cathedral of green above Samuel's grave. Rose stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and looked at the 2 trees that bookended her adult life. Thomas's tree, planted in grief for a man who had given her security. Samuel's tree, planted in hope for a future that had exceeded all her dreams. And now Samuel lay between them, his physical body returned to the earth, but his spirit, she believed, waiting for her in whatever came next. "He made me promise not to spend the rest of my life mourning," Rose told her children after the funeral. "He made me promise to keep living, to keep helping others, to find joy where I could, and she tried. She truly did." Rose continued to live in the house she and Samuel had built together, surrounded by memories and family. She continued the charitable work they had started, helping families in need find their footing. She spent time with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on the stories of Samuel and their life together, making sure his legacy would not be forgotten. But a part of her was waiting, counting down the days until she could be with him again. She was not afraid of death. How could she be, when it meant reunion with the man she loved? Rose lived 3 more years after Samuel's passing. She remained active and engaged until the very end, her mind sharp even as her body grew frail. On a quiet morning in late spring, with apple blossoms drifting past the window and birds singing in the oak trees, she passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her children buried her next to Samuel, between the 2 oak trees, exactly as she had requested all those years ago. The family gathered again, this time to mourn the passing of the matriarch who had held them all together, who had taught them about love and resilience and the importance of helping others. Thomas Samuel, now a grandfather himself, stood at his mother's grave and told the gathered family about the day Samuel had stopped to help Rose plant a tree. "That single act of kindness," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "changed not just my mother's life but all of our lives. If Samuel had ridden past that day, none of us would be here. This family, this ranch, this legacy of helping others, it all stems from one person choosing to stop and help, and another person choosing to accept that help." He gestured to the 2 massive oak trees that stood sentinel over the graves of his parents. These trees represent the best of who my parents were. One honors the past and the man who first gave my mother security. The other represents the hope and love she found with Samuel. Together, they remind us that life is complicated, that we can honor what was while embracing what is, that endings and beginnings are often intertwined. The years continued to pass, and the ranch remained in the family, handed down through generations. The two oak trees grew even larger, becoming landmarks in the area, so massive and ancient that people came from miles around just to see them. Great-great-grandchildren climbed their branches, played in their shade, carved their initials into bark already covered with generations of family history. And between those two trees, Rose and Samuel rested side by side, their love story complete, their journey finished. The widow who had been planting a tree for her husband had found help from a cowboy who stayed to plant one for their future. Together they had built something that lasted, something that mattered, a legacy of love and kindness that rippled outward through time, touching lives they would never know, blessing generations they would never meet. The oak trees stood strong and tall, witnesses to a love story that had begun with grief and help freely given, that had grown into something beautiful and lasting, that had created a family and a legacy that would endure. And in the rustling of their leaves in the Texas wind, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the whisper of that love story, telling itself over and over to all who had ears to hear. The widow planted a tree for her husband. The cowboy helped and planted one for their future. And from those two trees, from that chance meeting and shared labor, from grief transformed by hope and kindness rewarded with love, grew something that would stand for generations, a testament to the power of compassion, the resilience of the human heart, and the enduring nature of true love.